Karmani, performance of Asmin in this Anasvase, without certainty, Duma, smoke, Druma Atmanam, tinged body and mind, Bhavan, your good self, Apayayati, very much pleasing, Govinda, the personality of Godhead, Pada, feet, Padma Asavam, nectar of the lotus flower, Madhu, honey. Translation, we have just begun the performance of this fruit of activity, a sacrificial fire, without uncertainty of its result, due to the many imperfections of our action. Our bodies have become black from the smoke. But we are factually pleased by the nectar of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, Govinda, which you are distributing. Purport, the sacrificial fire kindled by the sages of Naimisharanya was certainly full of smoke and doubts because of so many flaws. The first flaw is that there is an acute scarcity of expert brahmanas able to carry out such performances successfully in this age of Kali. Any discrepancy in such sacrifices spoils the whole show, and the result is uncertain, like agricultural enterprises. The good result of tilling the paddy field depends on providential rain, and therefore the result is uncertain. Similarly, performance of any kind of sacrifice in this age of Kali is also uncertain. Unscrupulous, greedy brahmanas of the age of Kali induce the innocent public to such uncertain sacrificial shows without disclosing the scriptural injunction that in the age of Kali there is no fruit of sacrificial performance, but the sacrifice of the congregational chanting of the holy name of the Lord. Sutta Goswami was narrating the transcendental activities of the Lord before the congregation of sages, and they were factually perceiving the result of hearing these transcendental activities. One can feel this practically, as one can feel the result of eating food. Spiritual realization acts in that way. The sages of Naimisharanya were practically sufferers from the smoke of a sacrificial fire and were doubtful about the result, but by hearing from a realized person like Sutta Goswami, they were fully satisfied. In the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, Vishnu tells Shiva that in the age of Kali, men full of anxieties of various kinds can vainly labor in fruitive activity and philosophical speculations, but when they are engaged in devotional service, the result is sure and certain, and there is no loss of energy. In other words, nothing performed for spiritual realization or for material benefit can be successful without the devotional service to the Lord. Translation, we have just begun the performance of this fruitive activity, a sacrificial fire, without certainty of its result due to the many imperfections in our action. Our bodies have become black from the smoke, but we are factually pleased by the nectar of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, Govinda, which you are distributing. So we have two processes described here. One is the process of sacrifices. So the sages of Naimisharanya had gathered together to do a sacrifice for 1,000 years. Now, the process of sacrifice is a little bit complex, and the rules are given in the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. This was also the Yuga Dharma for Treta Yuga, which was millions of years ago. And there was no difficulty at that time in doing such sacrifices. But we hear from the Bhagavatam itself that if these sacrifices are not performed properly, we get very bad results. We get negative results. The mantras have to be chanted completely, or I say perfectly, with correct pronunciation. And all the other elements like cleanliness of articles and persons and place, etc., have to be there. And the execution has to be done according to all the rules given in the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. If that is done, then you get the result. So that was the process in Treta Yuga, but Dwapara Yuga meant that people were less pure, so they couldn't even follow that process in Dwapara Yuga. In Kali Yuga, the people are more impure, less intelligent, more unclean, more confused, and therefore very difficult for them to perform sacrifices. Nevertheless, we see here that the sages were very ambitious, and they were trying to do a sacrifice for 1,000 years. And what was the result? The smoke blackened their bodies. And they were doubtful, well, are we going to get success in this sacrifice or not? So there was no guarantee at this time that they would get any result. In Treta Yuga, definitely, this was Yuga Dharma, so everyone could do the sacrifices perfectly. But now it's Kali Yuga. Of course, it's the beginning of Kali Yuga, and very, very doubtful whether they could get any good result. So this shows that the intention was good, but the application was wrong. The process is bona fide. Sacrifice is a bona fide method of worshiping the Lord, but not practical at this particular time. So in other words, for a particular time and circumstance, we have particular recommended activities according to the qualification of the people. So we can't concoct our own method or discover our own method. It's much easier to go by the scripture, and if we do that, then we get the proper method for the proper time. So in the Vedas, we understand that there are different periods of time: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, and the people are differently qualified, and therefore they're given different processes for spiritual advancement. So because the people were very, very qualified in Satya Yuga, they were given meditation, which means mind. They could concentrate their minds with no distraction of the senses. This was the general quality of people in general. So therefore, this was the process. But as contamination set in, they could not concentrate their minds so much, so therefore they were given external type of worship. In this case, Treta Yuga had sacrifices, sacrificing into the fire with specific rules and regulations. So though it is very complex to follow all the rules, still people were able to do that. And again, this was not anything except worship of the Supreme Lord, but the Lord is represented not simply in the mind, but through fire. Of course, that's a little abstract because the form of the Lord is not the fire, but the people were able to understand that the fire was the consuming agent for the Supreme Lord. So it was successful in Treta Yuga. But in Dwapara Yuga, the people were more contaminated, less qualified. So they couldn't even conceive of the Lord in fire. They had to have a direct form of the Lord. So therefore we have the deity form, where we have, you can see the form of the Lord. The Lord has his head and his arms and his feet and his torso, and we can appreciate his beauty directly. So nothing was left to the imagination in Dwapara Yuga. Who was that Lord? We have a direct representation in the deity form. Still, rules and regulations are necessary for worshipping properly. And in Dwapara Yuga, those rules were somewhat complex. Nevertheless, the people in general could follow those rules and get success in their sadhana. In Kali Yuga, the people are least qualified, and therefore even the deity worship process is not recommended for everybody. People off the street cannot start doing deity worship. They won't appreciate that form at all. They won't be able to follow the rules properly, and consequently they'll come in offense. So therefore, that process is not given for the people in Kali Yuga. So according to the time, we get a different process. And in Kali Yuga, this present age, we get the process of Nam Sankirtan, chanting the name of the Lord. So we find there's a progression in the different yugas according to the qualification of the people. If the people are most qualified, they can simply use their mind and concentrate on the Lord and worship Him in their mind. They don't even need material things to use. In Treta Yuga, the people are less qualified, so they have external type of worship, but it is a little indirect through fire. And in Dwapara Yuga, again external, but there's nothing left to the imagination, so they have a deity form to worship. So they engage their mind and their bodies in serving the Lord with deity worship. In Kali Yuga, the people are not even that qualified to follow all those rules and regulations and understand the form of the Lord directly. So we have Nam Sankirtan as the process for the people in general. That does not mean that you cannot do the other processes, but the main process is Nam Sankirtan, chanting the name. So, and it's all worship of the Lord in just different forms, that's all, according to qualification. Right? So, in Kali Yuga, the form is sound. Just the name of the Lord, pronouncing the name of the Lord, using the voice. That is the process in Kali Yuga. We see in Sati Yuga, it was the mind, concentrate the mind. So we know that to concentrate the mind means jhana, or meditation. To do meditation actually requires some practice nowadays. You have to go through Ashtanga process, 8 steps to get to meditation, and then samadhi. So it's a little bit difficult. So because that's difficult, then we have external things like sacrifices and deity worship, and people can engage their hands and feet and eyes and so many senses in doing that worship. And in Kali Yuga, the main worship is simply using your voice. But our scriptures also tell us that this does not mean that we are deprived, because in chanting the name, we also use the ear, because we should hear the name, and we also use the mind. So we should also concentrate on the name and on the Supreme Lord when we chant the name of the Lord. So it's not just voice. It involves other senses. It involves the mind also. So it is not just one sense. So nevertheless, it's all, like I said, it's all worship of the Supreme Lord, and we cannot think that one is inferior to the other in any way. It is just according to the qualification of the people that they are given different processes and different times because of the differing qualifications. So we could think that perhaps, okay, people in Kali Yuga less qualified, they get this process. So ultimately, it must give a different result, a less attractive result than in meditation. But no, it's the same result. In fact, you can get greater result. It's a mysterious thing that you can get greater result from this. So that example is also given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where we have the story of Gopakumar. So he got mantra, Pancharatric mantra of Krishna through Diksha process, which we get in for deity worship and what we call our second initiation. So he got the Krishna mantra there, and he began meditating using that mantra. He didn't do kirtan or anything, but just meditating and chanting this mantra to himself all the time, meditating on the Supreme Lord like this. And due to that process, he was able to elevate himself through higher levels of the universe to Svargaloka and Maharloka and Janaloka, Tapaloka, Brahmaloka, and beyond that to Shiva Loka, and then to Vaikuntha by the power of that mantra. So it was very powerful, and not different from Krishna also. So he was able to do that. However, he was not quite satisfied with the result. Even if he got to Vaikuntha, he was not really satisfied, because the form that he saw in his meditation was different from the form of Vishnu. He had form of the cowherd boy, that was his meditation. The form of Krishna. And the form in Vaikuntha was this four-armed Vishnu form, which is also spiritual and pure, but somehow he was not quite satisfied with that. So that was the result of his chanting the mantra. He got up to Vaikuntha. Narada Muni gave him some good advice, and he says, if you want to fulfill yourself completely and realize that Krishna, you have to become less attached to your mantra, and you chant the name of the Lord, Nam Sankirtan. So then he began chanting Nam Sankirtan. Through that, eventually he was able to go to Goloka, and there he saw Krishna and all the cowherd people there, and saw all the wonderful pastimes of Krishna. So in other words, at a certain point after chanting his mantra, which is part of deity worship, then he began doing Nam Sankirtan, and then he went to Goloka. So Goloka gives the highest thing. So that's one advantage of the holy name. So though it is for the people in general because they're least qualified, it also gives, it's most powerful also, and it gives the highest thing that you cannot attain by meditation or by sacrifices or by deity worship. It gives something more. It gives the highest goal of all. So this is the glory of the chanting of the holy name, Nam Sankirtan, that it has this particular benefit of getting to the highest goal. This, of course, is connected with chanting Krishna's name. Gopu Kumar got a Krishna mantra, which he chanted when he got Diksha. But that couldn't get him up to the highest stage. He had to get that, chant the name of the Lord with complete devotion. And then he got to Goloka. So, therefore we do Nam Sankirtan, but it's not just Nam Sankirtan, because Nam Sankirtan is the general process for 1,000 Kali Yugas in the day of Brahma. So this is a very special Nam Sankirtan introduced by Lord Chaitanya, and that's Krishna's name. So it's Krishna Nam Sankirtan, Krishna Kirtan. That is the particular benefit we get in this yuga, and by chanting Krishna's name, then we get to Goloka. So here the sages, it doesn't mention chanting the name, but what they were doing, they were hearing the topics of the Lord. Govinda Pada Padma Asavam Madhu. The honey, or the asava means nectar, or even a liquor. It makes you drunk. From the lotus feet of Govinda. So the feet of Krishna are compared to a lotus. And the lotus, of course, is beautiful. It's nice and pink and soothing. It also has a wonderful fragrance to it. And then the bees come, and the bees like the nectar. They like to get the nectar out of the pollen, out of the flower, along with the pollen. So there's nectar in the lotus feet of Govinda, of Krishna. So how do they get this nectar of Govinda's lotus feet? That was through the ears. Sometimes, poetically, it's described the ears become cups. And with the cups you drink the nectar of topics about Krishna. So previously we had various topics of Krishna and his devotees discussed. Of course, we have the whole story of Parikshit, who was related to Krishna. We get the story of the Pandavas, we get the story of Yudhisthira and Arjuna, etc. And then we get Kunti and Krishna and others. So all this is the nectar from the lotus feet of Govinda, from Krishna. So the topics of Krishna are sweet and intoxicating, like the honey from the lotus flower. And we drink that through the ears. The ears become cups, and we drink that nectar. And then it goes into us, it goes into our ear, and then we get an effect. The jiva, or the atma, gets the intoxicating effect of becoming more and more attracted to Krishna and experiencing that sweetness. So here the sages say, we are satisfied, apayayati, this honey from the sweetness of Govinda's lotus feet, that is the topics of the Krishna, stories of Krishna, are so sweet that we become very satisfied, in spite of the fact that we're trying to do a sacrifice, and which is unsuccessful. We don't know if it's going to have a good effect or not. So, in other words, the sages themselves realized that they could get the ultimate goal simply by hearing the topics of the Lord and not concentrating on the sacrifice, which was not the process for this age. So, and this of course is not chanting the name, this is hearing the topics of the Lord. However, both processes are glorified, and in the Bhagavatam itself is said to be powerful because it has topics of the Lord, and if we hear those topics, then we get a very, very good result. We can begin to experience the bliss of Krishna and his the honey from his lotus feet. So not only the sankirtan, but also the hearing process is very, very important. So as I said, the two things go together. We have kirtan. Within kirtan we include hearing process. So kirtan we have, and then we have shravana. That's the hearing process. And then we have smarana, remembering the Lord. So the three things go together. So though we say that the process in Kali Yuga is Nam Sankirtan, this is the main process, we don't neglect the other processes. So therefore we have Shravana. We hear the name, and we also hear all about Krishna. So though the name is absolute, and we just chant the name Krishna, 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 then we can realize Krishna, but to actually get the highest benefit, we should know something about Krishna as well, so we can direct ourselves properly. So therefore, we have the Bhagavatam to explain who is Krishna, what are his activities, what is his form, what are his qualities, etc. And when we hear the word Krishna, then we get some understanding of what that word Krishna indicates, and then we can realize that. So along with the kirtan process, we do the shravana process, and of course we hear the name, but we also hear Bhagavatam. We hear the topics of the Lord. And then after that, then we concentrate our mind upon the sound Krishna and all the meanings of what that word means. So Shravanam and Smaranam, remembrance, go along with the kirtan process, chanting the holy name. So, of course, we can't isolate these processes also from association of devotees, sadhu sangha, because generally we hear from the devotees. So therefore we have not 3 but 4 processes: kirtana, hearing, shravanam, remembering, smaranam, and we get the sadhu sangha. That also has to be there, sadhu sangha. So all these are very, very important. Still, though kirtan is the most important process, we don't neglect deity worship, which was actually the process for Dwapara Yuga. It's not the process now. So it is also there, but it's not the most important process. So, but then it is modified for Kali Yuga. So because the process in Dwapara Yuga we cannot do. That's more difficult. So in Kali Yuga we get a modified process that is called Pancharatric deity worship. So that's why that word is sometimes used, the word Pancharatra, because this is a form of deity worship introduced for the people of Kali Yuga. So this is a process that has to be followed in Kali Yuga, the Pancharatric process. So the people of Kali Yuga are qualified for the Pancharatric process if they come up to the proper standard. So we don't neglect deity worship also, and therefore that's included also in one of our the 5 major angas, deity worship. We don't neglect sacrifices also. Of course, we don't do the elaborate sacrifices of Karma Kanda. We don't do the elaborate sacrifices of Treta Yuga. But the fire sacrifice also represents Vishnu. Agni is a representative of Vishnu. He receives all the items you offer into the fire and gives it to Vishnu. So therefore we also do sacrifices, which is another form of worship of Vishnu. But this is again a secondary process. And the main process is chanting of the holy name. In the case here of the sages, they understood that sacrifice was not going to give much result. However, the compensation is that they heard the topics of the Lord. So even if that sacrificial process couldn't give the proper result, at least they got the highest result by hearing about the Supreme Lord. So, and nothing was lost in that process. So, in Kali Yuga, we're advised to carry out this process of Nam Sankirtan. We do the other processes, still we should do the process of Kirtan. So we do sacrifices and deity worship. We have to chant the holy name of the Lord. Okay. Hare Krishna. Any question?
Was there other names that were given for Nam Sankirtan, like in other yugas, other incarnations?
We don't have any direct mention of particular names, but names is very flexible. So you can have 1,000 names of Vishnu, any of those names okay. There are 1,000 names of Nrsimhadev, whatever. So name is very flexible, so it's not you have to chant this name or that name. Right? But then Lord Chaitanya chose particularly Hare Krishna. But of course we have other names, Krishna, 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 Krishna. Hey, he was singing also, so we can sing other names as well. But the idea about the name is Nam Sankirtan is name means simply the name of the Lord, calling out the name of the Lord. Krishna, Govinda, Vishnu, like that. There's no grammatical form there, no verb, nothing. It's just calling out to Krishna. It's called the Sambodhana, calling out the name of the Lord. It's not like the mantras where we have Namaha Krishnaya Namaha or Vishnave Namaha or Trivikramaya Namaha. There's no verb form at all. It's just calling out the name of the Lord. So that's what Nama is, Nam Sankirtan.
Thank you for the class, Hare. I have 2 parts. The first one is, you mentioned that in the Kali Yuga we shouldn't neglect sacrifices and deity worship, and the main process is chanting the holy name.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand the temple is also like an embassy for the Lord. So how do we understand that sometimes people may say the process of Kali Yuga is chanting the holy name? Because I remember my spiritual master was giving one class, and even the pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, he was annoyed with one disciple, his name was Vishal, and every time in Vrindavan he would say, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, and Prabhupada got annoyed because there was some Zergs there, and he said, do something practical. So how do we also like do deity worship and do sacrifices, but do the practical things as well as the chanting process? And make a commitment to some service, some regulated service, even once a month or once a week. So how do we encourage that?
Yeah. Well, of course, we say Hare Nama Eva Kevalam. Just chant the holy name, chant the holy name, chant the holy name. But we can also, of course, some people can do that in an extreme way, but then they have to run off to the forest or something, or Radhakund and simply chant. But not many people are qualified for that. So therefore, we should follow the example of our acharyas and of the followers of Lord Chaitanya. So we have, of course, the two types of followers. We have the more renounced types, like Rupa Goswami, and they were kind of in the Babaji category of by themselves, renounced and carrying out chanting, and of course they were doing their other work as well. But what they did was they didn't just chant, they were writing scriptures, they were doing kata and all this associating, etc. So it wasn't exclusively just chanting. Then we have the other type of devotee. Those were the associates of Lord Chaitanya in Navadvip, in Bengal. Most of them were not renounced, they were grihastas. They were living in their house. Some were brahmanas, some were doctors, some were landowners, whatever, they had different occupations. So they carried out their family life and their occupation, and along with that they were doing chanting of the holy name, and of course they were doing deity worship and so many other things also. So yes, holy name is the process, ultimate process, but as I said, we don't neglect the other things, so we participate in other types of bhakti also. And as far as practical things, of course, then we have to do things under the guidance of devotees and guru. And all that's important. So we can't just say holy name, but that's related to sadhu sangha, taking the order of guru and Krishna.
The other question is about intention. You mentioned about the sages of Nishirani, the intention was good, but the result from the fire sacrifice, they got smoke on their body. So how do we understand that in spiritual life, even we have the right intention and then Krishna guides us to adjust it? For example, we get the result, if we clean a facility, just say sannyasi is going to come and visit, and we clean the facility, but then the Swami ends up staying somewhere else. We still get the benefit from cleaning that facility. So in the material world, it's the opposite. You don't get the benefit. So how do we understand?
Oh, well, anyway, by cleaning anything related to Krishna and his devotees, it's a service anyway, whether the particular person takes that, accepts it or not. So it's beneficial for us in any case. So all we can do in this material world is, to the best of our ability, with sincerity, with no deception, we try to do something which is pleasing to devotees and to Krishna. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it doesn't succeed for this reason or that, no fault of our own maybe, or even if we do have a fault, still, whatever we do sincerely, that part of it, Krishna accepts. So there's no loss on our part for that. So the devotee continues in spite of all the obstacles that occur in this material world. And by doing that, by continuing to have the correct attitude of perseverance and patience and devotion, then the Lord becomes merciful to that particular devotee.
Yeah, Maharaj, at the beginning of the purport, Srila Prabhupada is saying that there are so many flaws in Kali Yuga, or actually saying that the reason that the sacrifice wasn't kindled well is because of so many flaws. And then he says the first flaw is there's a huge scarcity of expert brahmanas to carry out such performances in the age of Kali. So is Srila Prabhupada indicating there that the sages of Nishirani weren't qualified to perform sacrifice like that?
Well, we have very high qualifications mentioned, like in the Karmakanda section of the Vedas, and all the rules are very, very complex. So you need very, very knowledgeable persons. They have to know all those rules in order to carry out a sacrifice. There was one instance in I think maybe 50 years ago or 20 years ago, Some German came to India, and he recorded one particular type of sacrifice that the Kerala Brahmanas were going to do. And he says, the last time they're going to have a sacrifice, this is in Kali Yuga. Because after that, those Brahmanas, there won't be any Brahmanas left. There won't be enough Brahmanas. They needed hundreds and hundreds of Brahmanas who knew all the mantras of those particular sakas of the Vedas, etc., to carry out the sacrifice, which lasted 100 days, just the preparation and doing all the things like this, and to get all those people together who had that knowledge. We know that as time goes on, each saka of the Vedas gradually becomes less and less. Each saka, some of them disappear every 20 years or so, one saka disappears, and then within that you get a few people, and you get less and less as each generation goes on. So they had enough brahmanas at that time to carry out that sacrifice. And then he recorded all the mantras, all the complicated procedures they went through, etc. He says, it's not going to happen again, because after this generation, there won't be enough brahmanas left to do that. So that's just one little sacrifice they were doing for 100 days. And this is a 1,000-year sacrifice they were doing, these brahmanas. So it requires great qualification. For some of them, obviously, were somewhat qualified, but not everybody could be, because Kali Yuga had started already. So now presently it's much worse. So very, very difficult to do those ceremonies.
In the Satya Yuga and the Treta Yuga, the philosophy of the Dharma is meditation and higher sacrifices, but and then Dwapara Yuga and Kali Yuga, it's deity worship and chanting, and those two, chanting and deity worship are Guru Goswami's 5 most potent forms of bhakti. But the other two...
Well, jhana, we can say, the introduction to jhana is smaranam. So that's our one principal process. And if you look in when they get into more, detailed, complex things, you go smaranam, and then after a while, then you go into jhana, and something called dhruva anusmriti, which is more concentrated jhana, and then you get samadhi, and then you realize Krishna. So we can say that smaranam turns into jhana, and that turns into realization eventually also. So jhana is also one of the angas, 64 angas. Bhakti as well as smarana, so both are there. The fire sacrifice is much less concentration on that. Because a lot of the sacrifices that are common are household sacrifices and sacrifices for samskars and things like that, which are more like for household things rather than for directly do the deity worship. But in other sampradayas, they do sacrifices also, which are devotional. They're non-Vedic sacrifices, like pancharatric sacrifices for the deity, etc. Like in the Sri Sampradaya or Ramanuja Sampradaya. It's much more common. Less common in the Gaudiya Sampradaya. In fact, very rare that you'll see sacrifices. It's only sacrifices in relation to samskars and other ceremonies. They do Vedic ceremonies that the people will do, but that's apart from the deity worship and the Nam Sankirtan, the major angas of bhakti.
I read in the Bhagavatam that in Saranya they were together for 1,000 years for the sacrifice, right? Mm-hmm. But is in Kali Yuga or in...
Yeah. The beginning.
So the same stages were there for 1,000 years?
Looks like it. They had a long life at that time. Maybe that's one reason why it wouldn't exceed, also because they couldn't all live 1,000 years. Because the general age in Kali Yuga is much less, like 100 years at most. So maybe a lot of them had to cancel out and they had to replace the people in the sacrifice also.
And also when observing the process of Bhakti, I can see many similar stages,
Yeah.
The only difference seems to be asana and pranayama.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have also the yamas and niyamas. So I was trying to understand what exactly are our yamas and niyamas. Would it be just the four-eyed
Four-eyed principles, basically.
And then
Yeah, because this is what they have in the yamas, yeah? Celibacy, non-violence, compassion, study of scripture, all these things. That's her.
And then the other ones about cleanliness
Yeah.
and honesty and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Where are those ones listed for sadhana bhakti?
In sadhana bhakti?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not direct angas of bhakti, but then we'll find in, let's say, Rupa Goswami's Upadesha Amrita, then he has, the 6 Vegas and the 6 unfavorable things and the 6 favorable things like this. So it's we can say it's included within that, the things. And of course, within the angas of bhakti, the negative angas, the second set of 10, then he has don't be controlled by lamentation, etc. So in other words, we have to give up all sinful activities and other absorption in material activities. So it's just generally stated there, not particularly. Okay? Hare Krishna.